Hi, Doug McLennan here at the Ojai Music Festival, day 2, Friday evening. And we've just heard the first concert of what is actually 4 concerts tonight that we're going to hear. One of the unusual things that's happening this year with the festival is that we're playing with the idea of what is a concert. So some concerts are 45 minutes, some are 2 hours, some are an hour, and tonight it's a sort of succession of concerts. We just heard Henry Cowell and Charles Ives with the Mark Morris Dance Company and the American String Quartet playing. And everybody is actually now moving over to Libby Park, where they will hear some John Cage for a little bit, and then we will return to the bowl. Unfortunately, we won't be streaming that this next concert, but if you join us back at 9 o'clock, we will start the next concert. So I'm joined here by Mark Swed, who's the music critic for the Los Angeles Times. And Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Doug.
Mark is actually one of the old-time Ojai fans. How many years have you been coming to Ojai?
I don't quite remember, but it's been since the early 60s.
Early 60s. So you've seen sort of the evolution over a lot of years.
I have, yes. Yeah.
So one of the things that's that I've heard you say about Henry Cowell, of which we heard the third and the fourth string quartet right now, is that he's sort of massively underappreciated. He doesn't have a big profile, a big presence in American music. Why do you suppose that is?
He was a bit of an outsider, but it's hard to know why that is. I mean, partly some of the scores are not in the greatest condition in terms of having been edited and that, but he was the founder of the California School of Music, really the founder of the concept of world music, one of the most important American composers, and it is just kind of outrageous the way, and maybe it's just kind of typical of America, that we champion some people and we don't others. He wrote 19 symphonies. You never hear any of them. If this was Britain, if this was the UK, there would probably be 5 or 6 complete sets of recorded Cowell symphonies, as there are, say, Bach symphonies or something, and Cowell's far more important than that. He was extremely prolific and very wide-ranging, and that's a bit of a problem because nobody quite knows how to place him. And by being so prolific, he wasn't entirely consistent. But when he was good, he was great.
He was an important teacher, too, no?
He was a very, very important teacher. John Cage, who was one of his pupils, referred to him as the open sesame of American music. I mean, Cowell had a lot to do with, to begin with, putting Charles Ives on the map. He became very close to Charles Ives. He invented things in his early years, in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. He wrote a lot of piano music of very different kinds, invented the tone cluster, which Bartók asked for permission to use. He was both John Cage's and Lou Harrison's teacher, and introduced John Cage and Lou Harrison to each other and arranged for both of them to study with Schoenberg. He was very good friends with Schoenberg. He lived a very long life. The second part of his life he lived in New York. He taught at the New School and was very influential there. He had a program on WBI, the Pacifica station in New York in the 50s, which was all about world music. He was a huge proponent of and expert in musics from many, many, many different cultures at a time when few people were. So it was an extraordinary life, and it's an extraordinary amount of work that we just don't hear. We simply don't hear.
And can you trace his influence to anybody today, to composers of today?
It's indirect. It's indirect. It's founded just about everybody, because this is a time of eclecticism. This is a time of world music. I mean, indirectly, you could probably trace every young composer in Brooklyn to Cowell. But it all goes through, it went through Cage, it went through other people. and we've just kind of neglected Cowell. Like I say, he wasn't great about keeping his scores in good condition, but his life is becoming documented. There's a new biography out that's very, very good, and it's starting to get played a little bit, but he has very few champions. I mean, Mark Morris is one of the few. Michael Tilson Thomas a little bit, but you don't find many.
So if you were to point to somebody who just listened to this concert and they were looking for what's the Cowell piece or two that they ought to really check out? Putting you on the spot.
That's a very
here.
good question, because there's so much and there's so little available on recording. There is a fairly recent recording of the piano concerto with Jeremy Denk and Michael Tilson Thomas, and that's a fine place to start. But the range to look for, there are many recordings of the solo piano music, and there are exceptional pieces. In the early part of the century, he had pieces like a piece called The Banshee, in which he strums across the strings to create this eerie sound of the piano. You know, he was banging on the keys. He was doing all kinds of things. He'll do Irish jigs with his elbows, and it's extraordinary music. And it did, it's filtered through without people quite knowing where it came from. Cage's prepared piano had its roots really in the things that Cowell was doing in the piano.
So you have all these people who were influenced by him at the time, but did they champion him at the time? I mean, was he one of these people like Ives, for instance, where there were real Ives devotees?
Not certain composers did who cared about him, like Cage and Harrison, and that. But there weren't a number of performers. There was also, his life was difficult and confusing. In the 30s, he was framed on a sex charge and went to San Quentin, and that was a very big trauma in his life, and was actually pardoned eventually, but had to leave the state and move to New York. So that was a big problem. And after that, people like Ives for a while turned against him. But Ives had championed Cowell a great deal. Schoenberg was good friends with Cowell. I mean, it's amazing when you look at his connections to music. He really was the open sesame. He wrote the first major book on Ives. He wrote a book on musical resources, which was just a textbook on all the new techniques in the first half of the 20th century. So he was a hugely important figure, and it's astonishing how little we get to hear of him.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear more, but I know you're anxious to
get
over to the playground.
The next concert,
and,
yes,
we've got 4 minutes 33 seconds coming
so,
up, and some Satie too, I think.
Yes,
so,
yes. Okay.
Anyway, so I'll say goodbye, and
thanks
for stopping
Doug.
by.
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
So we're going to stop broadcasting now, but please join us at 9 o'clock when we will return for our next concert.